you felt a desire, personal desire, to go accomplish something, and you chose that was more important.
Correct. I'm selfishly trying to do this.
They tend to put the job of more importance to their family. In that moment, that's when you will look back.
Most of them have to do with family.
Family alone. I can't copy. I want family alone. We got crews coming.
Welcome back to Surviving the Street, where policing meets personal growth, tough conversations, and partially filtered stories of real events. Today on the podcast, I have a former U.S. Marine, or always a Marine, should they say sometimes, like myself, and a fellow law enforcement officer. We're going to discuss the topic of work-life balance, which is one of the most common questions I get is, how do you balance the job and having a family? Super important. You got to have things in order to make sure that things are operating correctly. But before we get into that, I'm going to talk about a few administrative things I need to go through. January 3rd is a Wednesday. High-risk vehicle encounters, Pasadena, Texas. KineticConceptsGroup.com. KineticConceptsGroup.com. If you go on there, go under training, upcoming, you'll find the course there right now. Up until December 1st, you can use code Kinetic24 to get $100 off. If for whatever reason you're listening to this after December 1st and you still want a discount, reach out to me on Instagram, KineticConcepts_group, and tell me you want to sign up for the course. And then I will create a discount code for you that you can still use up until the course starts January 3rd, 2024. Also, we have to try to make these podcast episodes about 45 minutes to an hour in length. I can't really go over that because the last time we did this, the conversation was like 2.5 hours. I went through and was able to cut it down to 2 hours or around about that. And it still took me 5 to 6 hours to upload everything. And every time it got to the point where it was almost complete, something would happen, connection would be lost, and therefore I couldn't upload it, had to keep doing it, and almost didn't get it uploaded in time. 45 minutes podcast is more easier for me to upload, so we have to try to keep them within 45 minutes. If for whatever reason we can't close out this conversation in 45 minutes and we continue the conversation, I'll just have to cut it and do a part 2. So if you feel like there was an abrupt end and you wanted more, that's because there is more and it'll be on the part 2, but we're going to try and do it in 45 minutes. So one of the most common questions I get is, how do you balance work and life as a law enforcement officer? Knowing that, personally for myself, I came from the military and he did as well. I was married when I was in the military, and that kind of just transitioned out of the military into the civilian world. But, for me, at a certain point in my life in the military, or I was 18 years old, right? So I signed up for the Marines at 17, right? What is that program?
It basically the program where you have to have your parents sign for you.
Yeah, early, I can't remember the name of it. I think it was called something, but basically, signed up at 17, left for the Marine Corps at 18, the day I graduated. And so I was on a personal mission, right? 9/11, sixth grade, that's when that happened for me. And so for whatever reason, I saw that and was like, oh, I got to do something about this, being in sixth grade. So I went on a personal mission to fulfill something for myself, I would say, and the country, right? Duty to country, all that stuff. Just felt like it was an obligation, something I had to do. And so in 2010, like I get this right because otherwise the wife hears it, she'll be real mad. But in 2010, I got married. So I've been with my wife for 13 years. We have 4 kids. I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And like many, men that are married and have kids and have work to be done, we have, as men, we have responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, the way that I see it is our responsibility is to provide for the family, right? And I always kind of, not necessarily joke with my wife, but I kind of was like, hey, you're the nurturer, I'm the provider, like you facilitate the things that are going on at home and I'll make sure you have what you need to do that, right? But in 2010, I was married, didn't have kids at the time, and got to deployed to Afghanistan 2011, 2012, still didn't have kids. And, I knew personally for me, being, on a team and seeing the family thing play out with other Marines, right? different situations. I had squad leaders or team leaders that had been married for a while and had kids of all different kinds of ages at that time, right? And the thought in my mind, at least, always kind of bugged me just internally that, you know, and people will choose not, for a variety of reasons to kind of continue on with the military, which is a really like difficult thing on family, right? I mean, being in the military has to be one of the hardest things because you're gone 7 to 8 months to a year at a time, and you're missing out on a lot. Now, for me, I would see those things happening, and I always told myself like, I don't want that for my kids, right? So when I decided to get out of the military, for a number of different reasons, not just that, but it was a hey, I want to be home for my family decision, right? Um, and so that was pretty easy. It was pretty easy to do that. It also kind of probably would have been easy to stay in too because I don't have any kids, right?
Right.
But you sign a contract, right? So that's that contract. What is it? 4 years at least.
Yeah, four active, and then another four inactive.
Yeah. So you sign up for another 4 years, and then you have a kid. Well, now your kid is 3 or 4 years old by the
Mm-hmm.
time that's over with. So, and you don't really get to plan out what happens in between those time periods. And again, this is just a personal choice that I made for myself. Was that I didn't want to put my kids through that thing. Not to take away from anybody who is deciding that they still have a purpose in doing that, right? Because there's definitely um, don't want to take anything away from those guys. So I got out of the military, and I'm not going to go into the whole story about becoming a police officer and why I wanted to do it. I've already kind of told that story. Op Tempo Training Group. I did a podcast with him, and I talked about why I wanted to be a police officer, where it all started. But that was always part of my goal. And then so I guess people maybe you don't know this, or maybe it's not like a realization that you have when you become a police officer, especially in we'll just speak on the major city, like because I don't know necessarily how it works other places, but the new guy is going to get the worst shift and the worst days off. Okay, so you're looking at let's say Tuesday, Wednesday off, working night shift or working evening shift, right?
Yep.
That's what's available. That's what you're getting. So again, that has to be a decision that you make as an individual. Am I willing to go through that to get to go through point A to get to point B, right? And then you stick around long enough, eventually you kind of get to move around and do your thing. But as far as what we're going to get into talking about work-home life balance, that's where I come from before we really get into the discussion of, things that we've seen in our time on. He's going to talk about his experience and where he comes from.
All right. Well, first off, thanks for having me. And let's see. I joined the Marine Corps in 2008. In 2008, I was 18. I was dating my high school sweetheart at the time, and went to boot camp. Came back, and I decided, well, if I'm going to end up staying with her, you can't live off base or in a home with your girlfriend unless you're married. So went ahead and I made that plunge. Got married at 18, just like a lot of guys in the military do, especially if they have girlfriends at the time when they go to boot camp. So I did that, and it was great for the first while it lasted, and we lived off base. We got an apartment, and I deployed on a MEU, which is a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And what a MEU is it's a strategic placement for the Marine Corps to put Marines strategically throughout the world. So I did the 31st MEU in 2009, which was I was in Okinawa, Japan.
That sucks.
So that was, yeah. I mean, Okinawa itself is pretty cool. Nice island. Got to go do some deep sea fishing and whatnot. It was an all right time. However, that's when the strain started coming on to my marriage, right? So I was gone for 6, 7 months, and during that MEU, I was able to make phone calls and conversate with her over. It wasn't FaceTime at the time. What was it? It was I forget one of the video deals. At the time, Skype. Yep, there you go. It was Skype. So we get to Skype, and my wife at the time, she seemed like she was holding up fairly well. She She had her own struggles at home, which there wasn't a whole lot I could do uh, with, whether it was bills or, just every day-to-day stuff. And then, so 6, 7 months later, I return home and try to pick up back where we left off. And, you know, having a strong woman beside you when you're going to be in that kind of schedule. We're going to be gone for several months at a time, and then you get home, and then now you're going to be what they call back in the saddle training. So now you're gone for a week in the field when you just got home. You're at home for 2 to 3 weeks, and now you're back in the field. So it's stressful. It's stressful in the home life. Um, it's imperative that when you are at home, that you're present, right? So you're not thinking about work. You're not thinking about other things. You're thinking about your wife and your home life and what you can do to to better her and better that stuff. Um, right after probably about 5 or 6 months later, um, I volunteered to do a deployment to Afghanistan in 2010. I was gone there for about 5 months. Um, and that was pretty stressful on the both of us. Um, she had her own stuff going on. She had work and whatnot, and um, come back after Afghanistan, and I could tell, man, things were off, right? So trying to put all these pieces back together was a big strain on the relationship. Then shortly after that, probably another 5 or 6 months after, we did another MEU, a 31st MEU. So I was gone again. So that's 3 deployments in about a span of 2.5 years, right? Um, and it just crushed the marriage. It wasn't good, and I wasn't old enough and mature enough to understand really, what I was doing to our marriage and to her. Um, I found out at that deployment that she was unfaithful to me during my Afghan deployment with another Marine, which unfortunately happens quite often. So
Not just in the military either.
no, that's true. So the struggle from there was real. And I had to ask myself, okay, well, can I continue with this marriage? Can I continue to work on it? And the biggest thing was trust, right? Can I trust her to be able to continue with this career and continue with the relationship? And the answer was no. So I tried to, um, my 4 year term was coming up. I had the opportunity to extend for another Afghan deployment, and I turned that down. So uh, I got out on that early out program. I forget again what it's called, where you get out like 4 months before your EAS date.
Terminal leave.
Yep. So I got out about 4 months early, and we moved to Texas, and we were trying to build things back up, but I never could really trust her as much as I did before, and it ultimately ended our marriage. Um,
And I think that, well, again, I don't have any experience with that. All right. So I'm going to try to talk about something I really don't know about. All right. To be honest with you. But I imagine in instances where that type of relationship thing happens, it's very difficult to move forward from that.
yeah.
Um, but before we get into everything that happened after you left, I want to ask you something. So when you went on your first deployment and you came back and you said you volunteered,
hmm
right? So I'm going to ask him something that is going to come back into play down the road in this conversation. But when you did that, when you made that decision, why? Why did you make that decision?
So at the beginning, you talked about um, your calling or whatever, want to be something. So for me, it was wanting to, when I joined the Marine Corps, I want to be something, do something bigger than myself, right? So my brother joined the Marine Corps in 2006, 2 years before I did. So I basically followed in his footsteps. He joined the Marine Corps, went through Marine Corps boot camp. I went to his graduation of Marine Corps boot camp, and it was just in my mind, man, this is great. This is the coolest thing ever. I don't know why anybody would want to go to college when they can do this. Um, so yeah, to me, joining the Marine Corps was a no brainer. And then, you know, uh, when I was joining the Marine Corps and I talked to the recruiter, as everybody else's story is, recruiters are not they they're not faithful, right? They lie to you all the time. So I tried to go in as an O3, and the guy said, there's no spots. I was like, well, what's the next best thing? He said, motor T. I said, all right, well, go in motor T. Um, so, but I wanted to get into the fight, right? So that was the reason I volunteered. They had um, what they called, they call it like um, it was a MIT team. I forget what the acronym is. Anyway, so our main objective was to go and train the Afghan National Army how to drive trucks and to conduct convoys and look out for IEDs and being able to fight and combat the enemy around the vehicles and everything like that. So that's what we did. Um, and I actually lied to my wife at the time, and I told her that I didn't tell her I volunteered. I told her I got voluntold. Um, not I shouldn't have done that, right? So I made my own bed in that aspect, but I knew that she wasn't going to be happy that I volunteered for something. So I lied to her.
Now, I also want to point out that I do believe that we're talking really about two completely when we talk about law enforcement and home work life balance, and we talk about decisions that you make in the military, because basically what you're saying is you you felt a personal desire to go accomplish something, and you chose that was more important.
Correct.
Okay, now you should all understand that this country was built on men that were willing to do exactly that. Okay, so people sign on the dotted line and they throw their name in a hat, or they volunteer and they put their hand up and they say, "I'll send me," because it doesn't even really matter why. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and say it's for personal reasons, and because that internal feeling and duty, like it's the most important thing, and it will kind of like and maybe that's a good thing, right? Because like I said, a lot of people signed up and put themselves out there, and sacrificed themselves so that we could be here today, right? Um, so I'm not really trying to be careful, but I just want people to understand that we're talking about duty to your country, which if that isn't there and people aren't doing that, there's could be significant consequences, right? If everybody was saying, well, I'm not going to do that, I'd rather be at home, or if everybody was saying that, we would be screwed, right?
Yep.
So I feel like we're going to end up talking about two different things, which is, personal life, family life, being a police officer in the United States versus serving your country. I just feel like, let's be clear that I feel like those are two completely different choices that are being made for two completely different reasons. Okay. So go on. You were talking about how you left the military and
Yep. So when I left, I won't get into to how that all went, but left and the marriage didn't last. There was no trust there, and it was it took a little bit of convincing, but I pretty much told her like, hey, look, for the better for both of us, it's we should probably go our separate ways, and she finally she agreed, and it was a pretty easy divorce, so that was nice. Um,
I like how you said that.
yeah.
It was a pretty easy divorce, so that was nice.
Yeah, I mean, I told her, she could have the dog. She took the truck and whatnot. It's like a sad country song.
What else could you hope for at that point,
Um, and then later on, I met my current wife now. That was in 2016 when I met her, and um, she was completely different than my first wife, which was a nice little change of pace. And I informed her that,
Hang on a second though. I gotta say this because she's gonna listen, right?
oh, I'm sure she is. Yeah. Um,
So be nice.
yeah, absolutely. So I informed her that I wanted to join a police department. I wanted to do something again that meant something more than myself. I want to be part of something bigger, and I wanted something to, I don't know, just like you're talking about. I still had that dog inside me that wanted to go, um, you know, do something good. Be a part of something better. And the only thing I could think of that would do that for me would be law enforcement. Um, so we were living in Colorado at the time, and I applied to a bunch, probably like 7 different agencies in Colorado, all of which, no, 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 no. Um, and most of them didn't even give a reason why. So no big deal. So I talked with my wife about it, and she goes, well, she's got family in Texas, and she goes, oh, well, why don't we try Texas? I said, all right. I said, what about Chicago? And she goes, well, I don't know. So I applied to Chicago PD, and I got accepted to go take their tests and whatnot, and Colorado. Um, and she told me, she goes, honey. Oh, and our daughter was just born about 3 to 5 months before this conversation, and she goes, honey, if you go to Chicago, me and your daughter ain't coming with you. And I was like, all right, well, Texas it is. Um, so I applied to an agency in Texas, and got accepted, and went. And an important note: um, my current wife was extremely supportive, and having that support system there is crucial. If you're, and I'm selfishly trying to do this. Obviously, I want a good career, and I want a good retirement, and I want to be able to support a family. Um, so I'm trying to do, you know, trying to have my cake and eat it too, and not having a supportive wife behind you that says, "Yes, let's do it," um, could kill it right then and there. So she was extremely supportive. I still appreciate that in her every day. Um, but she said, "Let's go." So went ahead and went down to Texas, did all my interview stuff, the polygraph, the whole 9 yards, and was able to pass everything and whatnot. I got the phone call. I was at work, and the recruiter called me, and he said, "Hey, you passed everything. Um, how's such and such date to start?" And I said, "Ooh, man, that's quick." I think it was in like I think it was in like 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. I said, "Oh man," I said, "I got to move from Colorado." And he goes, "Well, we got another class and such date, like 3 or 4 weeks after." I said, "That'll work." Uh, so my wife was my next phone call, and I was obviously pretty excited about it. She could tell soon as she picked up the phone. I said, "Hey, guess what?" And then she goes, "You got accepted." I said, "Yep, we're going." Uh, she said, "All right, let's do it," and moved down here. And we haven't looked back since. It's I pulled her away from her her mom's side of the family. So her mom and dad separated when she was at an early age. So she was staying with her mom and her sister and whatnot. And I did pull her from the girls, which is a hard thing for her. And it's still something that she struggles with every day. Um, but that's that's something that I cannot let go unnoticed every day. It's important, and nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect, uh, but man, she's a trooper, and she's been behind me every step of the way.
You said that pulled her away from the girls, but you talked about her mom and her.
Yeah. So they still live up there in Colorado. Um, and they talk on the phone every day. Whether it's a minute or an hour. They talk on the phone pretty much every day. So
And it's been how many years?
uh, let's see, since 2000, it's about 5.5, 16, 6 maybe.
Now, this podcast isn't necessarily for females, right? I mean, let's be honest. Like nobody's
No.
whatever it is they're typing in on Spotify to listen to, it's not this, okay? However, though, if you know, since predominantly males will listen to this, um, but we are talking about family and relationships, so you know, you not only yourself but your wife, because you may find some information within here, or at least at a minimum resonate with the things that we're saying, and realize they're not the only ones. Because I mean, the scenario that you're describing is my scenario almost, in terms of just like we left a state we were in to come here for this job because it was something I wanted to do. Okay. But in one way that I would kind of, okay. So my wife has been obviously supportive and, of everything that I've wanted to do. But look, like you said, I mean, I'm asking her to leave a state that she grew up in, away from her family, to move to another state where she did have, or she does have, her aunt that lives down here. But you mean to tell me like I expect her to just be like, absolutely, let's go,
Yeah.
like it just doesn't make sense. So I'm not gonna say forced, that's not the right word, but I had a good job. I which is something we'll get into on the next podcast. Me and him will have a discussion about transitioning out of the military, and that will kind of play into this one. But I had a good job at the time, and I was making good money, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so there was all the stuff about before that wasn't my goal. I kind of got that job because it was an opportunity and I needed it. Didn't have a job, so I had to do it. But I was working towards becoming a police officer, and similar story to you, kind of put in, got called, like, let's go. It's like, oh, all right, cool. So that was kind of just the reality of that. And if you're looking for a law enforcement job, obviously it just seems like if you have a family, you got to go somewhere where that's going to pay you,
Hmm.
right? Usually, unless your wife is like a lawyer or something. Then I kind of ask, like, what are you doing to begin with?
Right.
you know. Um, but in my case, my wife is a teacher, and which is like every cop's.
Yep. Teacher, nurse,
Yeah. There's a whole thing about how you marry into your like usually typically whatever that.
sister professions.
Yeah, you marry into what is the, like, not your income basically. You marry into like similar incomes basically. But you know once you have a job, once you get hired, basically you just have to pass the academy. Well, you're getting paid while you're going through, so you're making money, right? And so we came here and she started teaching, and at the time we just had our two kids. Um, and then something we'll get into in a little bit. But she ended up not seeing the value in her working basically. It's like, well, I can put in all these extra hours and I can just work.
Right.
That way you can stay at home with the kids, because it was just becoming too expensive anyways. It's like, we're already paying this much money for daycare. Like, you might as well just stay home, right? It's kind of where we ended up. But something that I want to hit on is that in the military, as a 18-year-old kid, right? Or making that decision, and first, and this shouldn't be understated, is like, you don't know what the hell you want to do when you're 18. All right. Like, you go to college or whatever. Like, most of the friends that I had in high school that went to college straight from high school either didn't finish, didn't get a degree in what they went to school for, and so, and just like that speaks to the fact of like, you're just too young, like, so I have no pressure personally on my own kids to be like, you better have this figured out. It's like, I'm 33 years old, I don't really have it figured out. you know so it's just that when we came here, our lifestyle was a certain way because of just the family situation at the time. But as, you have more kids and then, you have work and you have opportunities and these things come up, you start to make different decisions. You start to see the value in making different decisions for certain reasons, right? And so in the military, 18 years old, sign on the dotted line, let's go, let's go. And I think that maybe some people don't grow necessarily out of that, right? They're like kind of me, right? Again, don't want to take away from the fact that this country is probably built on those types of people. So, but just like something that I was internally dealing with, just is that more important than what I have going on at home, or is that more important spending the time out here and achieving something maybe, or whatever, trying to atone for or achieve this thing that maybe doesn't even exist for whatever reason? Because is that worth all the sacrifices I'm already making?
That's the struggle.
And I saw something that was really good, and I've kind of talked about this before on the Instagram, but there was a Marine that I was watching on it was like a podcast basically, but it was like video on YouTube, and he was talking about how men of all ages, whatever, they want that thing that you're talking about, right? I'm speaking, well, for now I'm speaking specifically about the military. And then basically, you go and actually get that thing. You get yourself in that gunfight. You get yourself in that moment. And maybe at the time everything's okay and everyone's fine. But then, in this Marine's particular circumstances, which is a lot of the other ones, he's like, I wish I never would have been there.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's happening, right? People are dying, people are getting hurt. And now you're kind of dealing with that for the rest of your life. And there's people that I know from the military that got out before I actually went to Afghanistan, and they maybe even still to this day struggle with the fact that they never went. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I just think as men, that's a that's a hard thing to, especially try to get them to understand. It's like, you're good, man. You don't have to go over there and experience those things.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't mean that you will go there and experience those things and win. So again, for the like 100th time, don't want to take away from those dudes that decide that that's what they want to do. But I think for me, I knew that almost immediately. Like, I just was like, I don't really want that. I'd rather be at home, So I'm going to get out, I'm going to get out of the military and take care of my family the best way that I could. But then again, looking back on it, or even now or whatever, it's just that you start to find yourself doing the same things in a different way under different conditions, which is in the military, I'm making all the, hey, send me, I'll go. And then, you get out and then you're like, well, I got to go get this job now. I got to do this. I want to do this. I want to do this. And it's fine. Like, you should do that. You should do the things that you want to do. But I guess the question becomes, what are you sacrificing in the process? Right. And is that actually worth it? Because a lot of the people that I know, as law enforcement officers, they have terrible relationships and they're not good. They're not like what you said, it went well or whatever. The divorce went well. Everybody's happy. I don't know, what you said. That's not their situation, and it's just not good for the kids. It's not good for the family. It's not something that you want to have to go through. And what I can personally point to, because I've seen it, is that these officers are they tend to put the job of more importance to their family.
Absolutely.
And you'll see people, even supervisors, whoever, talk about, family first. Okay. And then, okay, well, they'll say whatever they want to say, but then you have to ask yourself, am I actually doing that? You know what I mean? And so for me, when it comes to working, right, again, every situation is different. And at times you have to say, as a couple, husband, wife, family, hey, should I make this decision? What do you think about this? Because if I do, this is what's going to happen. Are you willing to let me, maybe it's like study for supervisor, right? So study for the exam. I need 2 months of you leaving me alone, followed by after that, a year or two of me being on night shift somewhere,
Yep.
And I think that that conversation between you and your wife is like, I personally, for me, how it works is like, even with like overtime, it doesn't matter to me if I work or not, but it probably matters more to my wife,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not even from a, you know, a money perspective. Like, it just matters. Like, does she want to be at home with these 4 kids by herself? You know what I mean? So every decision that I make is a mutual decision, right? And it's fair to say that sometimes you have to make, like, you're undecided and a decision has to be made. Um, but I think, you know, it's really important. This is what I do, and this is what I suggest that you should do, right? You should ask yourself, if something was to happen to your wife or your kids, could you honestly stand there and say, man, you know, one, gave it everything I had, you know, and of course you're going to want to have spent more time with them and want to have done more and even feel like you didn't do enough, right? To begin with, probably. Um, but I'd imagine you would have serious complications with that, you know, if you, because in that moment, that's when you will look back, right? You may be so busy, have your head down doing all these things and like, oh, okay, whatever, all this stuff's happening in the background. And okay, I'm keeping it together. I'm keeping it together. Okay. Everybody's kind of happy, whatever. And then something bad happens. And then you're going to stand there and go, man, maybe I shouldn't have volunteered for that.
Yep. Yep. I got something to break your heart. So I work a lot of overtime, right? The the police departments across the nation are having a hard time um, recruiting individuals to be police officers. Um, with everything that's going on in the world, I won't get into. Um, so they're they have grants and different overtime funds and I work a lot of overtime with my partner, and it brings in more money for the family, right? And maybe in a man's eyes, more money for the family is going to be better family life, not going to have to struggle with finances, going to be able to save money, or pay off debt or whatever their situation is. Okay, but even with a supportive wife, I didn't realize what it was doing to my family until I had my 6-year-old daughter tell me, "Daddy, I hate your job." It's and I why, honey? Why do you hate my job? And you know, I've told She doesn't really understand at 6 years old exactly what I do, but I've told her, Daddy's a police officer. Daddy chases bad guys. Um, and she's always been super intrigued with it, right? Um, but I've been working all this overtime. I A lot of times I just go home to sleep and then I go back to work, and I'll do that for weeks and weeks at a time. Um, and having that supportive wife at home is nice to a point. All my daughter wants to do is play with dad. She wants to go through do things with dad. She wants to do this. She wants to do this, but dad's always at work. Um, and when she told me that, uh, she goes, "Dad, I hate your job. You're never home. I want to play with you." Um, it uh, it it hit deep down inside. Um, and since then, I've tried to cut back the overtime, not work as much. Just try and work more just my regular shifts, and do things more with her, and try and be a better father. Um, but it I've decided that maybe my career path within the police department needs to change. Uh, um, right now, I'm in a proactive unit, which means I'm going out there proactively trying to you know find people breaking the law, and really getting personal with these people, trying to proactively put people in jail. And it takes a lot of time and effort, um, and maybe slowing down is probably going to be the right call for me. Sometimes I feel older than I am. I'm only 33 right now. Um, so I'm having a battle with, um, I still a lot of times have the fight in me to want to go and be proactive, and make the city a safer place, and to be that guy. Um, but when she told me that, it was a gut check. It's saying, all right, I need to put my family first. Um, and so that's the goal. I'm slowly trying to move into that. Uh, and I'll tell you what, it takes a number out more so, I believe, on the kids than it does the wife. But with you know, it's important that your wife and your kids support what you do, but it's also imperative that you support your wife and what the kids want to do. Um, you said that it was for your wife, it made more sense for her to not teach anymore, right? Um, and that's understandable at a when we're talking about finances or whatever, it costs more money like for like people, young kids. Okay, daycare is not cheap; it's expensive. Um, so it's cheaper depending on what your wife does for a living versus you, whoever makes less. Sometimes it makes more sense for them just to stay home, take care of the kids and whatnot. Um, I have found that it might be worth the financial heartache a little bit to have your wife, if she's got um her own you know attributions, she wants to do her own thing, have her own career, and it brings you both together, I think, closer at the end of the day. um Being able to go do your own thing, go work, have your own friends, your own stuff, and then come back together and talk about things at the end of the day, and whatnot. I think that's also could be very important depending on the situation of the family. um but when we work all these hours and you're at home and all you're thinking about is work at home, right? You're thinking about um what the next case you're going to be working, or where you're going to go to next in your career and whatnot. If you're not at home and your kids are doing their own thing, okay, that's not being present in the home. And it can be a family killer. It put a lot of stress on the family. So
Yeah, I think so. Again, the theme is like just self-evaluating and if you're married, is like making a mutual decision on what is best, and maybe that's just good for you too, because you might have your head down, so focused on this goal to achieve this thing, but the reality is that, um, not to say that she doesn't want you to do that necessarily, but you might even realize that there's a better option or a different way to go about getting the same thing. Or again, hey, are we actually prioritizing what's most important in this situation? And you might be saying, well, I'm good because I don't have a family and I don't have kids. Okay, well, then I would ask you again, like, what are you sacrificing to go after the thing that you're going after? Right. And just at face value, I could tell you you're sacrificing your health. I could see it. Um, you know, um, you're sacrificing your health. Yeah, you might be making money, sacrificing your health, not getting enough sleep, all these different things. So just because you don't have a family or kids doesn't mean that this doesn't affect you, because it does. And that's why, like, when I was talking about the military, I just feel like that's such a different, if you've never wanted, or you've never, I guess if you were never in the military, me and you joined for the same reasons, it seems like. We haven't had that conversation. But I just feel like even now, like, that's a hard thing to, like, convince somebody otherwise. Um, but I also feel like that's different. I feel like the consequences are much greater for the people that decide not to do that in that situation, right? Versus the consequences of you as an individual in your city where you work, uh, not volunteering for overtime, right? Or not chasing after this thing that you think means something, right? And there's also other things to look at too. I have awards of things, or recognitions of things, and I don't want to take away from that either, right?
hmm
You can't really get those things or do those things if you aren't uh, sacrificing something, right? Now, if you don't have kids or you don't have anybody that's going to look at them, then maybe this doesn't apply to you. But for me, it's like, stacking up these, recognitions or awards, stacking up these little wins of whatever, right? That quite honestly mean nothing to me. Okay. I don't look at it and read it and talk about it and put it in an office for people to see and be like, wow, you did that. Like, okay. The reason that I like to have those things is so that, when I'm not here, maybe, or even if I am, and my kids at some point decide to care enough to look into it and read it, they will kind of have that same, you know, desire to achieve greatness in a sense, right? Just a way of looking at it. So again, it's not. I just want to be careful not to take away from those who are willing to sacrifice what needs to be sacrificed in the moment or at the point of time. But I can tell you that at the end of the day, if something happens, you're not going to get that time back. You know what I mean? In the military, and you're deciding, or you're going to go out and do all these things, and your kids are growing up or whatever. Like that's it. Never going to see them little again. And so, and I was kind of playing with my 3-year-old last night, and I was thinking about that, and I'm like, we're all the little kid things you do, throwing him around, tickling him, doing whatever, and because my oldest is 10, and you kind of doing that, and I was actually thinking that, like in my mind, I'm like, I'll never do this again, and because then you start doing that to your 10-year-olds, it's starting to get it's starting to get weird, and so just kind of just even being available for that moment, right? And I just, again, as an individual throughout your time, career path, whatever it is you choose to do, you're going to have to continuously evaluate that and ask yourself why and what for and what's the purpose behind it and what am I sacrificing to get there. And I think that to be able to do that takes a lot of maturity. You talked about immaturity, early on in the Marines. Well, every 18-year-old that joins the Marines, pretty immature.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we police officers were our own worst enemy. Okay. I mean, yeah, sure. There's a lot of, well, there isn't even really a lot technically, if you want to look at the statistics of officers who are killed, but, I did some research and what I could find, and the numbers are really just, I don't understand why I couldn't find like 2018, 2019, 2020, 2020, like the numbers of suicides, right? I was like,
Officer suicide?
yeah, I was trying to find it like just stacked up neatly so I could just look at it, and I couldn't find it. I had to go all over the place to try and find that. But what I did come up with was in 2020, there was 186 officers that committed suicide. 2021, there was 171. So they went down from 2020 to 2021, but police officers are 54% more likely to commit suicide compared to the civilian, your average civilian. So more than half.
Right. So let me ask you a question. Why do you think that is?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of reasons why.
Yeah.
And that's a whole podcast or 5 or 7.
Well, this is just spitballing here, but I would imagine that most of them have to do with family, right?
Well, definitely. And I think some of the situations that I know about did involve some type of family aspect. But one of the things I did write down from what I saw is that on-duty stressors have been noted to lead to social isolation as well as relationship or financial problems. Particularly, the structure of shift work has been found to be associated with suicidal ideation, potentially due to abnormal sleep routines leading to difficulty coping with stress. So, again, and this is something that you're probably doing that you don't even realize, right? Because it's not like, oh, I had this one experience and I feel nothing. Oh, I had this other experience. Nah, I feel nothing, right? You just kind of, and I have some experience kind of with this stuff that's come at a different time. It's like you don't realize you're in it until you're already too far down in there, but all of these things that, I mentioned, you were talking about just family, on duty, like the on duty stressors. It means you are self-inflicting yourself with a whole bunch of stuff that is causing you problems in one way or another. So that all leads into that balance of, how much effort or time you're putting into work and how much effort and time you're putting into your family. And if I had to choose one, it would definitely be more time and effort into the family. There is something that I want to touch on, which is training, because I know, because I've been married for 13 years, there's times where, I mean, it doesn't even have to be training. It could be like, hey, I'm going to go golf, right?
Mhm.
It could be whatever. Now, if you've been married long enough or you've been in a relationship long enough,
I know where you're going.
yeah, you just know that, it can be a contentious thing, right? And training is no different than you wanting to go do something else. It's like, to them, it's the same.
Correct.
To them, it's you're not here. Okay. So, you can do the point that I'm going to make is that the reason you justify or how you can justify training, being gone, signing up for that class, whatever, is like you get to come home. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you're putting you're putting this investment into you continuing to come home.
Yep.
Right. And we've seen that. I've seen that play out a number of times. But for the women that may or may not be listening, if they say they want to go train, you have to kind of try to understand that that's an investment into them being able to come home.
Right. The thing that I think that we were about to touch on was you know keeping work at work, especially as well. Um, it's I think it's important. Now I'm truthful with with my wife, and she'll say how was your day, and when I say it was good, and she tells so uh, she tells me that it's the Sugg family tradition to give vague answers, right? How was work? It was good. Okay, what'd you do at work? It was the police. you know. So I try to give her descriptions on how my day was, or um, we did this, and that. Um, but I think that sometimes, depending on the family dynamic and what's been going on in the past, right? So if you know that the family dynamic has been kind of a struggle at home, right? So she's stressed because she's out here with the kids and whatnot. And to every woman, when you're at work, especially with our job, right? Or if you have a partner every day, and every time you call her when you're at work, and you're laughing and joking with your buddy, her mindset isn't you're working. Her mindset is you're hanging out with your buddies at work. You know, so with talking to her about what'd you do today, um, you know, we did this, and this, and this. Um, I guess you know how you portray that message can speak volumes and can affect her in a certain way. So, um, not saying lie to your significant other, but downplaying maybe you know the adrenaline rush you got at work today, right? Or how this was fun, or how you had such a good day and whatnot. Well, she's at home struggling with the kids. Is It's important. You gotta really be careful and look at how you're portraying that message to the family.
Yeah, here's something really important that you'll deal with, pretty much right away as an officer, and is that you'll go to work and you'll experience all these things, and in your mind, or even in your reality, maybe that is the reality, these are more or less significant problems, right? And you go home and she's explaining to you something that's a problem, and you're like, how is that a problem?
Right.
You know? Um, so we go to work and we do all these things and we experience all these experiences where uh traumatic, maybe not on our, maybe not even to us, but to somebody else. Somebody lost somebody in the family, bad vehicle accident, whatever. And then you go home and it's problems about normal house problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or kids problems. And I think well, I know for a fact that's hard for some men, or maybe it's just hard for everybody initially. But something that you have to do, because I remember my buddy was talking to me about this, how he was like struggling with it. He was telling me, like explaining it to you, but he was mad about it, and he approached it when she had a problem, and like not like trying to solve that problem or be a solution to that problem, but he was like, how is that a problem?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got all this stuff going on, or I saw this, like that's a problem. And I'm like, okay, but you can't do that, okay, because they are living in their own reality and their problems. You know, they believe them to be
Big problems.
serious
Yeah.
serious to them, and so you have to. And maybe that's to officers' peril. Like maybe that's not necessarily a great thing, because one of the things that my wife, every cop, gets not told this or not told this or confronted with this part of their life by a significant other is that you just have no emotion, like,
Hmm.
and yeah, you're right. And the reason is because I have learned to remove emotion from everything, because I know that emotion's what gets you in trouble. Emotion makes you make terrible decisions. Um, and you can't be um, emotional about tragic things that continue to happen that you're witnessing, because you won't survive.
Yeah.
So you learn to subdue your emotions, and things to pretty much nothing to you becomes a big deal, and you show no emotion over certain things that she's emotional about, which is a tough one. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Um, the old saying is like, there's no sense of crying over spilled milk, so that's something that we talk about. But yeah, I mean, coming home from work and having to deal with the stuff that's going on at work, right? I think it takes a lot of maturity, and you have to be humble about it, right? You have to really separate the two in a different sense, though, right? So separate your work life from your family life, but also, and this is different. You have to gauge based on who your wife is, or significant other or whatever, on how you're going to deal with that. So for me, the only reason I don't tell my wife something that happened is because I forget,
Hmm.
or it just isn't significant enough at the time to talk about it or whatever. Like I'll tell her something that happened 2 days ago, like, oh yeah, did I tell you this? No, you never told me anything.
Yeah.
Um, but and maybe maybe your wife gets anxiety when you tell her these things. But I'm of the impression of like, because you know how I used to hear people say, or I used to hear people say, when you first get on, you know leave work at work, but it was almost said and presented in a way of like, don't talk about work at home. And I don't think that's right. Like,
No.
like to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so if you hear that, from my perspective, and again, it's like, I mean, it's no different than if she was a nurse and was experiencing things at work and she wanted to tell you about it. Well, what's the difference?
Yep.
You know? So I don't, and even in the military, I did the same thing. I didn't lie to her. I didn't, if we're in the bad area, I told her,
Hmm.
if someone got blown up, I told her, if someone got, there was a firefight, I told her about it, um, and my thing was always like, I don't want something to happen to me and her think that I was sitting behind a desk the entire time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like that would be much worse.
It would be.
Like, oh yeah, he's fine. He said he's writing letters or doing whatever. Like he's good. And then it's like, oh wow.
No. You want her to be proud of what you're doing and everything. You know, it's you bring up a good point. I think that you need to be vulnerable to your family, right? So when you put up this wall, so to speak, at work, right? So all the emotions go out of the picture and everything. When you come home, um, which I'm I haven't done this in the past. I probably should start. Um, when I come home, I need to be more vulnerable. Um, it's part of being, more present. So, actually listening to what the kids are saying to me, or what the wife's saying to me, um, and actually really listen and be vulnerable, be present, and we'll see. I'll give it a try. I'll try and be more vulnerable. I never really thought about it that way. You just spoke about it, but yeah, I mean, being silent about what you're doing, I don't think is the key, but you know, breaking down that vulnerability, breaking down that wall when you're at home.
Right. We're gonna get into a couple questions. For now, these questions I ask in the Instagram story, Kinetic Concepts _ group. If you don't know about that already and you're not over there following, I'll ask if anybody has questions. I'll put the topic out and then I'll read some of the questions on the podcast and we'll kind of answer them. Sometimes the question is already answered in the topic, so I don't really per se go over those. But I have a couple different ones that are related but didn't quite answer. So, first question is how to turn off hypervigilance at home, if even possible. Okay. So, my perspective on this is that this is more or less a character issue. Okay. As an individual, as a man, understanding when it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense. Now, I also don't want you to confuse hypervigilance with just being aware
Hmm.
because I think people do. Like, so for example, when I'm not in uniform and I'm off duty and I go to pump my gas, I'm I'm aware.
Hmm.
I'm not hyper vigilant, but I'm making sure that like there isn't a car with dark tinted windows and a tinted windshield with a paper tag rolling by me.
Yeah.
I'm making sure that they're not if somebody parks next to me, at the next pump over and I can't see into the car and it kind of looks like it could be something, I'm focusing on it
Yeah.
because you should be.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm in my home right now. I don't care. Like, I'm not looking out my window. I mean, I don't really understand. I just think that there's a mature, humble way of being aware,
Right.
right? That doesn't. I think if you say hypervigilance, I feel like, well, that's more of an on-duty thing. Like,
Yeah.
under certain conditions. But if you lump hypervigilance into being off duty, I think you have a problem.
Hmm.
Like, I think we're at the point where you need to talk to somebody about what's going on, because you shouldn't be hyper vigilant. As soon as this is, right? So, like, when you're in your police car, you already know, got a uniform on, I'm in a car that says I'm a cop, I'm a target.
Yep.
Okay. So, that is much different than I'm in my personal car driving from my house to work.
Yeah.
Those are two different things.
They are. You know, when I first started putting on the uniform, and got my first taste of the hood, so to speak. Okay. Um, regardless whether if I didn't even do anything that day, I was still exhausted at the end of the day. Why is that? Because of that hypervigilance. Okay. And it's every day. Um, with that target painted on your back, if you're not paying attention to everything, I mean, sights, smells, sounds, whatever it is, um, then it could potentially end up, a bad day for you. So with that target on your back, it's imperative that you're switched on. Now, if you're switched on at home, what does that say to your kids? Okay, what does it say to the wife? What does that say to the neighbors? Okay, that does that does that say dad's a crazy person? If you if you're in home and you're constantly walking around with your gun, looking through all the windows, right? You hear someone close their trash can lid next door. Like that's a little. Now as an officer, right? If you're always looking, you hear something, someone shut a car door behind you or whatever, you're looking, right? Because you're you want to be aware. Now if you're doing that at home, with the neighbors and whatnot, that's a whole different dynamic.
Yeah. And I think the difference is that in one case, you are marking yourself as a police officer in a number of different ways. You also have a duty and a responsibility to pay attention,
Hmm.
right? But when I don't have my uniform on, I'm not of that same level of alertness.
No.
I mean, I talked about the Cooper's color code and all that stuff. I mean, you have to understand the difference between the two, right? I mean, if you are at work and you're one way and you literally take your uniform off, put it in your car, and you go to drive from work to your house and you're acting the same way, there's an issue. I would even say probably a good idea to like be a good witness.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I still hear some things, kind of happening nowadays or whatever, and they're just you're off duty, serious bodily injury or death, things that we really care about. And be a good witness, relax. You know what I mean? Maybe ask yourself, do I really need to get involved, or do I really need to pull over and do something about this thing without my body armor, without my badge, without all these other assets available to me? Or could I just be a good witness if they needed me to be one, which is our policy anyways.
Right.
So another question somebody has is how to deal with family being unsupportive or even legitimately toxic about pursuing a law enforcement career.
Yeah, that's a struggle. I don't really know if I have an answer to that because of the fact that I do have such a supportive wife and family. All I can say is it's probably not going to work. One of them's going to eventually break.
I guess my question would further be, which kind of family are we talking about here? Like, are we talking about brothers, sisters, cousins, or are we talking about wife? And yeah, it's not going to work. I mean, again, you got to have that if you're asking me from a husband wife perspective or boyfriend girlfriend or whatever, you better figure that out before you take that plunge, because you're again, what are you sacrificing? There's a whole bunch of things to get into with that in terms of like what other options are there. I mean, why now I would say this, if it's I did have experience with this in family when I was 18 years old or 17 joining the military. My dad always told me from the beginning, dude, what the hell are you doing that for? Like, why are you going to be in the infantry? Like, go do a job, which, neither him or I understood at the time. He's like, go get a job in the Marine Corps. You can get out and get a job afterwards. And I'm like, no, first of all. Secondly, that's not even how it works anyways. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you were motor T in the Marine Corps, you get out, you can't just go be a mechanic, right?
Right. No.
I mean, so, even in the Navy, I mean, you go be a Navy corpsman and you get out, you're still going to have to probably go out and go do all the certifications and whatever. It's not like, oh, you were in the Navy doing this? Like, come on,
Yeah.
So, but I had an issue with that, one, picking the job that I wanted to do in the Marine Corps, which was the infantry. And then, people are kind of supportive, and then they're like, oh, you're going to Afghanistan? Kind of maybe not so supportive anymore.
Yeah.
Well, because they're scared or whatever for you too. And they don't understand why. Like, I actually remember one of my family members like, why are you doing that? Like, why would you want to do that? Fuck, I don't know, 9/11, So I had some issues there. But again, dude, when you're 18 years old, you're making your own decisions. Ain't nobody going to tell you what to do. And if there's, go after whatever it is you want to go after because you want to do it. I gotta let other people outside of your space dictate what you do with your own life.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. And if let's just say like you have other family members that are like not supportive or toxic about you being a law enforcement officer, once you graduate, you get the badge, you're doing the job, maybe they change their ways. Like, not so bad, right? Okay, cool. But maybe they're still not cool, not friendly. And then guess what? They're not going to be a part of your life anymore. And it's not a good idea to have them a part of your life, not only for, the emotional support reasons that they don't, I guess, support law enforcement or whatever, but, they're also your family and they're not supporting you. So that's a whole nother issue you need to reevaluate.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know how to help you with that, but I hope that helps in some way. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to support Kinetic Concepts Training Group or Surviving the Street podcast, you can head over to kineticconceptsgroup.com. If you're interested in being notified of upcoming training, you can subscribe to the website. If you're interested in having TCOL certified training at your department, send me an email at instructors@kineticconceptsgroup.com.
118, so this is my family alone. I can't copy. I want family alone. We got crews coming.